Hi, I'm Elden from Company of the Staple. We're a 14th century living history group making videos about handcrafts and history. Today I wanted to talk about seam stitch, used to connect the body and skirt panels on the 14th century extant Greenland garments from Herjolfsnes. And before I get into that, I just want to disclaim, I'm not a trained seamster, I'm not offering professional advice. This is just what I've been able to work out through experimentation from the archaeological extant garments and from other reenactors. I am talking about hand sewing. I think hand sewing is an important historical skill and it's one I want to get better at. I'm not here to say, oh, you shouldn't use a machine to sew hidden seams. Like, if you want to do that, go for it. So there aren't any surviving medieval texts on how to sew clothes. We have surviving texts for cooking and painting, but nothing for sewing. Even the extant garments that we have from the medieval period aren't a lot of help because usually they've been sewn with linen thread, and so even where the wool fabric has survived, the linen rots and we just have some indentations left to guess what stitches were used to construct the garments. One exception to this is the Greenland garments from Herjolfsnes described in the book Woven into the Earth. These were sewn with woolen thread and some of the seams have survived for us to study. Unfortunately, when I first read Woven into the Earth, I was just so confused by the description of the seams that I just sort of ignored it. The book says, long seams were probably sewn from the right side and usually with small invisible stitches. I thought maybe this was a translation error or something. Like, I couldn't figure out how to get from what was described in the book to anything that I knew about how to make a running stitch seam or a backstitched seam. Even when a companion book for Woven into the Earth called Medieval Garments Reconstructed was released with the intention of helping reenactors and costumers to recreate the Herjolfsnes garments, the diagram for this seam and the text description was the same, and I was no closer to working out how this seam was supposed to actually be sewn. This was in the back of my mind, and when I came to start a new project recently, I decided to look around online and see how other people were interpreting the book and hassle people on some forums about their interpretations. After doing some of my own experiments and test pieces, that started to click for me. So I just wanted to sit down and make the video that I wish I'd been able to watch when I wanted to understand this Greenland seam stitch. So try and do this without a modern steam iron. I'm going to give this a light spray down, fold over about 6 millimeters. Now that I've got a fold on one edge, I'm going to flip it over and take the other edge to be joined. And these are the insides of my two pieces of fabric. So I'm going to line up this piece just against the seam allowance of that piece. Just use my pins to stop them from moving about while we go on to the next step. All right, I've threaded up my needle with some dry linen thread, as in it's just straight off the reel. I haven't put any wax into it like I normally would. And I'm going to baste these two pieces together so they're held a bit more closely temporarily so I can get the pins out of the way. I'll just do a long running stitch. Now I can remove my pins. And the piece is basted together. So next I'm going to sew the two pieces together. And to start off, I'm going to turn this back for a second, put my needle in through the fold so that the knot comes to sit at the back inside that fold. Now, I'm going to pinch the fabric between my index finger and thumb, like so. So with my thread through the edge of that fold, I'm going to take the needle, I'm going to pick up a little stitch of the brown fabric, and then I'm going to come up through the fold of the blue fabric and pull my stitch tight. So now I'm going to move along. I'm going to put the needle in right under where it comes out of the blue fabric, but I'm going to come back out through the blue fabric 2 millimeters further over. And so with each successive stitch, I'm going to move across about 2 millimeters. So as I move along, I'm keeping my stitches up close to my thumb and index finger, pinching that fabric, because by proprioception, your right hand has a good idea of where your left hand is and vice versa. I don't have to squint and strain as much to see the small stitches because I can feel where my hands are in relation to each other. Okay, so now I've got my sewing pass done, but we need to remove this basting thread. So I'm going to take my snips, hold the tips closed, and then use that to pick up the stitches and flick them out. If it gives us trouble and it doesn't want to come through, it doesn't matter if we rip the thread as long as we can remove all of the pieces. Now I need to overcast the seam to protect the seam allowances from fraying out over time and to secure those seam allowances against this piece of wool. I've got the seam turned around so the seam allowances are facing towards me. So I'm going to come up through the seam allowances so the knot is sitting under those seam allowances there. I'm going to take the needle. I'm going to come down below where the thread is coming out, and I'm going to pick up a piece of the blue fabric. Now, I'm going to try not to go all the way through. I'm going to try and pick up some of that fibre, but without piercing all the way through. So if I went in and back out like a stitch, or you can see the needle, you'll see the thread, but we don't want to see the thread on the outside of the garment. That's just something that becomes easier the more you practice it. Now, once I've got that piece of the inside of the fabric, I'm going to spin the needle. So it's going that way through the fabric. I'm going to tuck the tip of it under the seam allowances and spin it and bring it up through the seam allowances. I'm going to aim to bring it up a couple of millimeters over from where my last stitch came out, and I'm going to try and overcast about 2/3 of the seam allowance. I'm going to pull this sort of snug, but not with a high degree of tension. It's fairly loose. If you pull them really tight, you will get a pucker on the good side where the seam will pucker up. So moving along, take a little bit of the back of the fabric, wind it underneath, pass back out through the seam allowance, pick up my needle again, pull that just snug. So with that, I have the seam overcast on the back side and stitched on the front side. Just to give it that final finish, I'll press it with an iron, or in this case, I'm just going to use the bone folder again to press everything into position. And seam is done. It's a pretty secure seam at this point. That is an extremely strong stitch. It doesn't gap, it doesn't go anywhere. So that's seam stitch. I'm still pretty new to this myself. I'm sure I'll get faster at this as I do more practice. I'm putting this out there because I hope that you'll try it yourself. If you do, please drop a comment, get in touch, and let me know how you went with it. Thanks for watching.